The system had no name that mattered to anyone. Star charts marked it only with a number, a warning to stay away, and a note that said nothing useful had ever come out of it. Ice drifted where planets used to be. A moon, cracked in half by some old disaster, spun slowly in the dark, and under its broken shell, something had been sleeping for a very long time. The salvage ship Fair Return was not built for glory. It was built to pick through wreckage other people did not want, and its crew liked it that way. Less attention meant less trouble. Captain Daniel Reyes ran the ship the same way he ran his life. Quietly, carefully, and without asking questions he did not need answered. But when the sensors picked up a heat signature from inside a moon that should have been stone cold, even he leaned forward in his seat. "That's not natural," said Grace Holt, the ship's chief engineer, reading the numbers off her console. "Nothing down there should be warm." Daniel gave the order to move closer. It was a small decision, made the way small decisions are made every day on a working ship, but it would turn out to be the most important choice of his life. They found the opening 2 hours later, a crack in the ice wide enough for a shuttle to pass through. Owen Marsh, the crew's historian and translator, insisted on going down with the first team, even though nobody had asked him to. He had spent years reading old star charts and forgotten alien records for fun, and something about this place made his hands shake with excitement instead of fear. Inside the moon, the ice gave way to metal. Not wreckage, not rubble, but walls, smooth, dark, and untouched by time in a way that made no sense. Grace ran her scanner across the surface and found no rust, no decay, nothing that should have survived however many thousands of years this place had been buried. "This isn't a ship that crashed," she said. "This is a ship that was hidden." They walked for almost an hour through silent corridors before the lights came on. Nobody touched a switch. Nobody gave a command. The lights simply woke, one section at a time, following the footsteps of the humans as they walked deeper inside. Owen stopped walking and stared at the ceiling glowing softly above him. "It knows we're here," he said quietly. Daniel, listening over the comm from the Fair Return, told them to keep moving but stay careful. He did not believe in ghosts, and he did not believe in magic, but he had learned a long time ago that fear kept people alive, and right now his crew needed to be afraid enough to be careful. They found the heart of the ship 2 levels down, a massive chamber with a single dark column standing at its center, surrounded by strange writing that covered every wall. Owen photographed everything he could, his excitement now mixed with something closer to awe. The symbols did not match anything he had studied. They were older, cleaner, and strangely beautiful, like they had been made by someone who cared deeply about how they looked, not just what they meant. Grace approached the column carefully. As she got close, she felt something she could not explain, not fear exactly, but the feeling of being looked at by something patient and very old. She reached out and touched the surface. Nothing exploded. Nothing attacked her. But somewhere deep inside the ship, a low hum began, so quiet she almost thought she imagined it. "Grace," Daniel said over the comm, his voice tighter now. "Time to go." She agreed, though part of her did not want to leave. On the way back to the surface, she kept glancing behind her, certain that the ship was somehow watching them leave the same way it had watched them arrive. Back aboard the Fair Return, the crew argued about what to do next. Salvage law was clear enough: an unclaimed derelict in open space, without any living crew or active owner, could be claimed by whoever found it first and registered it properly. Daniel had done this 100 times with wrecked freighters and abandoned mining rigs. He had never done it with something like this. Still, rules were rules. An opportunity like this did not come twice. Daniel filed the claim before they even left the system, giving the coordinates, the size of the vessel, and a description that undersold just how strange it truly was. He did not fully understand what they had found. None of them did. But he understood enough to know it was valuable, and valuable things needed to be protected before anyone else could take them. Towing the derelict out of the ice took 3 days of careful, exhausting work. The ship was heavier than anything its size should have been, as if it were built from something denser than normal metal. Grace stayed near it the entire time, running scans, taking notes, and quietly talking to it the way some people talk to old machines they trust. On the final night before they reached open space, she was alone in the cargo hold when the lights above her flickered once, gently, like a slow blink. She froze, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. But she was certain, in a way she could not prove to anyone else, that the ship had noticed her standing there and had chosen, just for a moment, to let her know it was awake. When the fair return finally broke free of the dead system and turned toward home, nobody aboard fully understood what they were bringing with them. They only knew it was old, it was powerful, and it was theirs, at least for now. Word would travel fast, faster than any of them expected, and far across the galaxy, in places none of them had ever heard of. Old and careful eyes would soon turn toward the same small, unremarkable human ship and the treasure it now carried home. News of an unusual find spread through human space before Grace Holt had even finished her post-flight paperwork. Someone at the shipyard leaked a single photograph of the strange dark walls to a news network, and within a day, everyone from schoolchildren to senior military officers was arguing about what the vessel actually was. Officially, the derelict ship, now anchored inside a heavily guarded orbital yard, belonged to Daniel Reyes and his crew under salvage law. Unofficially, everyone knew a discovery this size would not stay in the hands of a small salvage crew for long. Within a week, government scientists, engineers, and security officers filled the yard, all trying to understand a ship that refused to explain itself. Grace was allowed to stay, mostly because nobody else could get the ship to respond to anything. She had become, without meaning to, its unofficial voice. Whenever a team of scientists carried in new scanning equipment, the ship would sometimes power a corridor light for Grace and no one else. Whenever someone tried forcing open a locked door, the ship would seal it tighter. It seemed to trust her, in whatever way something like this could trust anyone. Owen spent his days buried in old records, comparing the strange writing from the ship's walls against every archive he could access. It was slow, frustrating work, made worse by the fact that most of what he needed did not exist in human libraries. What he did find, piece by piece, worried him more each day. Fragments of old alien historical texts mentioned a lost alliance called the Old Compact, a group of ancient civilizations that had once kept peace across a huge stretch of the galaxy using ships unlike anything built since. The records were vague, almost afraid to describe what those ships could do, and every mention ended the same way. The Compact had fallen, and its greatest ships had vanished. "I think we found one of them," Owen told Grace late one night, spreading printed pages across a table in the yard's control room. "I think we found one of the ships nobody was supposed to find again." Grace did not seem surprised. She had suspected as much from the way the ship behaved, not like a machine following old programming, but like something that made its own choices. That night, for the first time, the ship spoke to her. It did not use words, not exactly. She was standing near the same dark column from the day they first found it, running late checks after everyone else had gone home, when a pattern of light bloomed across the wall in front of her. It was not random. It repeated, slowly, almost like it was trying to teach her something. She copied it onto her tablet without understanding it, but the ship kept repeating the pattern until, somehow, she understood it anyway. Not words. A feeling. Waiting. Watching. Choosing. She did not tell anyone what happened that night, not even Daniel. She was not sure anyone would believe her, and part of her worried that saying it out loud would make it less real. Meanwhile, far beyond the edges of human space, in territories most humans had never even heard named, something else was happening. A quiet alliance of older civilizations called the Concord, formed generations ago from the descendants of the fallen Compact, began receiving reports of unusual activity from a ship matching a description they had hoped never to hear again. Communications moved quickly between old, careful governments who rarely agreed on anything, but agreed instantly on this. Ambassador Doran Kell was chosen to lead the response, mostly because he had spent his career studying exactly this kind of history, and partly because his superiors trusted him to be calm where others might panic. He read every report twice before boarding his ship, and even then, he was not sure he believed what he was being sent to recover. "They found the Ancile," his aide told him quietly, as their vessel prepared to depart. "The humans think it's just an old wreck." Doran did not answer right away. He had studied the old records as a young diplomat, back when the Ancile was still considered pure legend, a story told to explain why the Compact had fallen apart the way it had. If even half of what the old texts claimed was true, Then the humans currently celebrating their incredible salvage discovery had no idea what they were actually sitting on. Back in the yard, the ship's power systems began slowly increasing output, a change so gradual that only Grace's most careful instruments picked it up at first. She flagged it immediately, sending the readings to Daniel and the small group of officials now overseeing the project. "It's not dangerous," she told them, though she was not entirely sure that was true. "I think it's waking up." Nobody fully understood what that meant. Not the scientists studying its hull, not the officers guarding its perimeter, not even Grace, who had come closer to understanding it than anyone. But somewhere deep within the old ship's systems, something long dormant was beginning to stir, responding not to human curiosity, but to a presence and a history the humans around it had barely begun to imagine. Human space looked smaller than Doran Kell expected. He had studied its borders on old star charts for years, back when humanity was still considered a new and somewhat reckless addition to galactic society. But seeing it in person was different. Small fleets, new stations, a species still learning the rules everyone else had lived by for centuries. It made what he had come to do feel almost unfair. His ship was granted entry without much resistance. Humanity, still eager to prove itself a cooperative member of the wider galaxy, rarely turned away diplomatic visitors, especially ones representing an alliance as old and respected as the Concord. Doran used that goodwill carefully, requesting a formal meeting with the highest officials available before anyone had time to ask too many questions about why he had come. He was given an audience with Admiral Ruth Sinclair and Ambassador Ilsa Bauer within 2 days, a speed that told him humanity understood, at least partly, that something important was happening. "We understand you have concerns about a recent salvage discovery," Ilsa said carefully, once formal greetings were finished. She had clearly been briefed, though not fully. Doran could tell from the careful way she avoided naming the ship directly. "Concerns," Doran repeated, choosing his next words with practiced patience. "That is one way to describe it. The vessel your salvage crew recovered is not simply old technology. It is an asset of great historical and cultural weight to civilizations far older than your own. We are asking for its return." Ruth's expression did not change, but her voice grew firmer. "Under galactic salvage law, an unclaimed derelict belongs to whoever recovers it first and registers the claim properly. Our crew did exactly that. Laws written for cargo ships and mining rigs were not written with something like this in mind," Doran said. "I understand your position. I am asking you to understand ours as well." The conversation continued for over an hour, polite on the surface but tense underneath. Doran avoided mentioning the Ancile's true capabilities, worried that revealing too much might convince the humans to hold on even tighter. Instead, he spoke of history, of respect, of an old wound the Concord's member species still carried from the fall of the Compact centuries ago. He hoped shared understanding would succeed where legal argument might fail. It did not work as well as he hoped. Humans, he was learning, valued fairness deeply, but they valued keeping what was rightfully theirs even more. While the diplomats argued in quiet rooms, Grace continued her strange, wordless conversations with the ship itself. She had not told the officials everything, worried that admitting the ship could communicate at all might lead someone to try controlling it instead of listening to it. But she trusted Owen enough to tell him. "It's not a weapon waiting for orders," she explained one evening, as they reviewed the latest round of light patterns she had recorded. "It's more like someone waiting to decide something. I don't think it belongs to anyone. I think it chooses who it's with." Owen believed her. His research, slow and painstaking, had turned up an old fragment describing the great compact ships not as tools, but as judges, built to decide who deserved protection and who did not. If that was true, then no law, human or otherwise, would ever really settle who owned the ship. Only the ship itself could decide that. News of Doran's diplomatic mission eventually reached the public, and reactions across human space were sharp and immediate. Some argued the ship should be returned immediately, out of respect for older civilizations and a desire to avoid conflict. Others argued just as loudly that humanity had earned the right to keep what it found, fairly and honestly, under rules the wider galaxy itself had created. Daniel Reyes, still technically the ship's official salvage claimant, found himself pulled into meetings far above anything he had ever expected to attend. He did not enjoy the attention, but he refused every quiet suggestion that he simply hand the claim over and let the matter disappear. "We found it," he said plainly, during one particularly tense meeting. "We didn't steal it. We didn't take it from anyone standing there defending it. If the rules say it's ours, then it's ours until someone proves otherwise, not just tells us to be afraid." Doran, informed of the comment later, found himself oddly impressed despite his frustration. He recognized something familiar in it, a stubbornness his own people's oldest stories described in the very species who had once built the Ancile in the first place. Still, patience was running short on both sides. Back in Concord territory, quieter voices grew louder, arguing that diplomacy was taking too long, and that a show of strength might succeed where careful words had failed. Ships began moving, slowly at first, gathering along the edges of Concord territory closest to human space, officially described only as a routine escort and observation fleet. Doran received the orders with a heavy, uneasy feeling he did not share with his aides. He had come to negotiate a peaceful return. Instead, without his full agreement, his mission was quietly becoming something closer to a threat, and somewhere aboard a quiet, waiting ship in human orbit, something ancient continued watching everything unfold, patient in a way nothing young could ever fully understand. Rumors moved faster than facts, and by the time the truth about the ship in human orbit reached the farthest corners of the galaxy, it had already changed shape a dozen times. Some claimed humanity had built the vessel themselves, disguising a terrible new weapon as an ancient discovery. Others claimed the ship was cursed, doomed to destroy whoever tried to control it. A few, mostly older and quieter species who remembered fragments of the truth, said nothing publicly at all, but watched the unfolding events very closely. The Concord's decision to move ships toward human territory was framed publicly as routine and peaceful, but privately, not everyone agreed with waiting for diplomacy to succeed. A small, impatient faction within the Concord's military believed talking had already failed the moment humanity refused to hand the vessel over. They did not wait for official permission to act. 3 of their operatives entered the shipyard on a quiet night shift, disguised as part of a scientific exchange program humanity had recently agreed to as a gesture of goodwill. They moved carefully, avoiding cameras, slipping past checkpoints with equipment designed to bypass human security systems entirely. Their goal was simple: disable the yard's defenses long enough for a small extraction team to remove the ship's core systems, crippling it before anyone could stop them. They had not accounted for the ship noticing them first. Grace was asleep in the crew quarters near the yard when her tablet lit up on its own, displaying the same strange pattern of light the ship had shown her weeks earlier, except faster now, more urgent. She sat up immediately, some instinct telling her something was wrong before she even understood why. By the time she reached the control room, alarms were already sounding. Security feeds showed strange shapes moving through restricted sections near the ship's hull, but every camera pointed directly at them somehow failed at the same moment, as if something inside the yard did not want to be watched clearly. "It's protecting itself," Grace said, watching the chaos unfold on the remaining working screens. She was right. Inside the ship, sections of corridors sealed themselves without any command from the humans monitoring the systems. Lights that had once glowed gently now shifted to a harsh, warning red. One of the Concord operatives, moving through what he believed was an unguarded maintenance corridor, found the floor beneath him suddenly humming with energy, a low vibration that grew stronger the longer he stayed still. He retreated immediately, alerting the others. Whatever they were dealing with, it was no longer simply an old, sleeping relic. Security teams reached the area within minutes, though by then, the intruders had already begun withdrawing, unwilling to test whatever the ship might do next. They escaped the yard largely undetected by human systems, their presence confirmed only through fragments of data the ship itself seemed to have deliberately preserved and later revealed to Grace. The attempted infiltration, though unsuccessful, changed everything. Admiral Ruth Sinclair increased security around the yard significantly, no longer willing to treat the situation as a purely diplomatic matter. Ambassador Ilsa Bauer requested an emergency meeting with Doran Kell, furious that an act like this could happen while formal negotiations were still supposedly underway. Doran was equally furious, though for different reasons. He had not authorized the operation, and learning of it left him embarrassed and, more troublingly, uncertain about how much control he truly had over his own government's actions. This was not sanctioned by my office, he told Ilsa directly, with none of his usual careful diplomatic distance. I do not condone it. Whether or not she believed him, the damage to trust between both sides was done. Humanity, already suspicious of the growing Concord presence near its borders, now saw every diplomatic word from Doran with far more doubt than before. Meanwhile, Owen's research finally uncovered the piece of history he had been missing. Deep within an old, half-corrupted archive file, he found a detailed account, written by a historian from a compact descendant species centuries ago, describing exactly why the Great Alliance had truly fallen. It was not war between equals, as most modern records suggested. It was judgment. The great ships, built to protect and guide, had eventually looked upon their own creators and found something lacking. One by one, they had simply withdrawn their protection, leaving the compact to collapse under its own weight. Owen read the passage twice, then a third time, before showing it to Grace. They didn't lose the ships, he said quietly. The ships left them. Grace looked toward the yard outside the window, where the massive, ancient hull sat silent and still beneath careful human guard. Then maybe, she said slowly, the question was never who owns it. Maybe the question is whether it decides we're worth staying with. Neither of them said it aloud, but both understood the same uncomfortable truth. Whatever happened next between humanity and the Concord, the final decision might not belong to either side at all. Tension between humanity and the Concord did not explode all at once. It built slowly, day by day, the way pressure builds inside something sealed too tightly for too long. Diplomatic messages grew shorter and colder. Patrol ships on both sides began keeping closer watches along shared borders. And somewhere in the middle of it all sat a single ancient vessel, silent and still, while two very different groups of people argued over what it meant and who deserved to keep it. The breaking point came on a morning that started like any other. Ambassador Ilsa Bauer received a formal message from Concord leadership, delivered through Doran Kell with visible reluctance, demanding the immediate surrender of the vessel within 72 hours. If the demand was not met, a Concord fleet already positioned near human borders would be authorized to enter human space and take the ship by force. Doran had argued fiercely against sending the ultimatum, warning his superiors that pushing humanity into a corner would likely provoke exactly the kind of conflict they claimed to want to avoid. His warnings were ignored. Fear, it seemed, made even careful people impatient. Admiral Ruth Sinclair received the message with the same steady calm she brought to every crisis, though anyone who knew her well could see the tightness in her jaw as she read it twice. 72 hours, she repeated to the room of senior officers gathered around her. They expect us to just hand it over because they're bigger than us. Nobody in the room believed surrender was the right answer, and Ruth did not either. Within hours, every available human ship capable of combat was called into formation near the shipyard, a fleet far smaller and far less experienced than the one gathering just beyond human borders, but a fleet willing to stand its ground regardless. Grace spent those final hours not preparing for battle, but standing quietly beside the ship's dark central column, the same place she had first touched it weeks earlier. She did not fully understand why she felt responsible for what happened next, only that she did. I don't know what you want, she said softly, unsure if it could even understand her words directly. But if you're going to choose something, now would be a good time. The response came slower than she expected, but stronger than anything before. The dim hum she had grown used to over the past weeks deepened into something powerful enough to shake the floor beneath her feet. Lights across the entire ship blazed to life at once, section by section, until the whole vessel glowed like something waking fully for the first time in thousands of years. Outside, sensors across the human fleet detected an enormous surge of energy from the shipyard. Officers braced for the worst, uncertain whether they were about to witness a weapon activating against them or for them. The Ancile moved on its own for the first time since its discovery, lifting slowly and steadily out of its resting place within the yard. It did not fire on the human fleet. It did not fire on the approaching Concord ships either. Instead, It positioned itself directly between the two forces, a single massive presence separating two fleets that had been prepared, moments earlier, to fight each other. For a long, tense moment, nobody on either side moved. Doran Kell, watching from the bridge of his own vessel, felt something close to relief mixed with dread. He recognized what he was witnessing, even if his own commanders did not fully understand it yet. This was not a machine choosing sides in a political dispute. This was judgment, the same kind his oldest historical records had warned about, arriving in front of him in real time. He opened a direct channel to Concord Command, ignoring proper procedure entirely. "Stand down," he said firmly. "If we attack now, we are not fighting humanity. We are fighting the very thing our ancestors once trusted to protect us, and we already know how that story ends." His warning, combined with the sheer, undeniable presence of the awakened ship, was enough to give even the most impatient Concord commanders pause. Slowly, reluctantly, the fleet began pulling back from human borders, unwilling to test a power none of them fully understood. Aboard the human fleet, Admiral Sinclair watched the Concord ships retreat with a mixture of relief and disbelief. She had prepared her people for a fight they were likely to lose. Instead, something ancient and unexpected had simply chosen to stand beside them instead. Back in the yard, Grace remained near the ship's core long after the tension outside had eased, tears she did not fully understand slipping down her face. She had not commanded the ship to do anything. She had only asked, honestly and without demands, and it had answered in the only way something like it truly could. The galaxy, watching the entire event unfold through countless news channels and diplomatic reports, would spend the coming weeks trying to understand exactly what had happened above a small, relatively young human colony. But for those who had been there, the truth was simple enough. An ancient warship, built long ago to judge the worthy from the unworthy, had finally made its choice, and it had chosen humanity. Within days, footage of the ancient ship rising between two fleets spread across every major news network in known space, translated into more languages than anyone bothered counting. For older species who remembered fragments of the old compact's history, the images stirred something closer to grief than surprise. For humanity, still new enough to galactic society to be underestimated by almost everyone, the moment marked a turning point nobody had fully expected. Ambassador Ilsa Bauer found herself busier than ever in the weeks that followed, no longer fighting simply to protect a single salvage claim, but negotiating humanity's entirely new position within the wider galactic community. Governments that had previously treated human delegations with polite dismissal now requested formal meetings. Trade offers, once slow and cautious, suddenly multiplied. It was not that humanity had grown more powerful overnight in any traditional sense. It was that everyone else had been forced to reconsider exactly what humanity might be capable of earning. "They're not afraid of our fleet," Ilsa explained to Admiral Ruth Sinclair during one of their regular briefings. "They're afraid of what it means that something like the Ancili chose us." Ruth, more comfortable with battle plans than politics, still understood the point well enough. "Then let them wonder," she said simply. "We didn't ask for this. We just didn't run from it either." For Doran Kell, the aftermath was far less comfortable. His failure to prevent the ultimatum, followed by his very public order to stand down against his own government's wishes, cost him significant standing among Concord leadership. Some called him a coward for backing away from a fight. Others, quieter and fewer in number, called him wise for avoiding a battle none of them could have won. Either way, he found himself reassigned to a far less important post within months, his career effectively ended by a single moment of honesty. He did not regret it. Before leaving human space entirely, he requested one final, informal meeting, not with Ilsa or Ruth, but with Grace Holt, the engineer he had heard so much about during the crisis. She agreed, curious what an aging, quietly disgraced diplomat could possibly want from her now. They met in a small observation room overlooking the shipyard, the Ancili visible through the window behind them, calm and dim once again, as if the events of the past weeks had simply been a brief, unusual dream. "I spent my whole life studying what your people call legends," Doran admitted. "I always assumed the old stories exaggerated what those ships could do, what they were meant to be. I was wrong." Grace glanced toward the ship, her expression thoughtful rather than proud. It's not really about power, she said. I don't think it ever was. I think it's about whether you're willing to stand for something honestly, even when it costs you. Doran considered that for a long moment. My people feared losing a weapon, he finally said. I think what we truly feared losing was the right to decide who deserves protection in the first place. Your people never asked for that right. You simply acted like you already had it. He left shortly after, returning to a quieter, less celebrated life among his own people, carrying with him a lesson few in his government were willing to hear. Life in the shipyard slowly settled into something resembling normal, though nothing about guarding an ancient, sentient warship could ever be considered ordinary for long. Daniel Reyes eventually returned to smaller salvage work, uninterested in the constant political attention his one great discovery had brought him. He visited the yard occasionally, mostly to check on Grace and the ship he still, technically, held partial claim over, though everyone understood by now that the Ancile answered to no one but itself. Owen continued his research, slowly piecing together more fragments of the old compact's forgotten history, always aware that whatever he uncovered next might change humanity's understanding of its place among the stars all over again. Grace remained closest to the ship of anyone, spending quiet hours simply sitting near its central column, not asking for anything, not demanding answers, just present. Sometimes the lights would shift gently around her, patterns she had slowly learned to recognize as something like comfort, or maybe even quiet gratitude. Late one evening, alone in the yard long after the others had gone home, she noticed something new. A faint signal, buried deep within one of the ship's oldest data archives, activated on its own for the first time since its discovery. It was small, easy to miss, nothing like the dramatic awakening weeks earlier. But it was there, patient and deliberate, exactly the way the Ancile itself had once been. Grace sat quietly, watching the signal pulse steadily on her screen, and wondered, with a mixture of excitement and unease, exactly what, or who, it might be trying to reach. Far beyond human space, in old and mostly forgotten records nobody had thought to check in centuries, something else was beginning, slowly and carefully, to wake up as well.